Ned Kelly has long stood as one of the most recognizable and debated figures in Australian history. He is remembered not simply as a bushranger, but as a man shaped by hardship, injustice, and the rugged conditions of colonial life. He was born in 1854 at Beveridge in Victoria, into an Irish immigrant family burdened by poverty and old resentments carried from a troubled past in Ireland. His father, John Red Kelly, had been transported as a convict, and this background cast a permanent shadow over the family's standing in the colony. From early childhood, Ned grew up under the weight of suspicion directed at families like his, who were poor, Irish, and marked by the convict stain. Life in rural Victoria was already demanding, but prejudice from police and authorities made every hardship heavier. As the eldest son, Ned took on responsibility far earlier than most boys his age. He worked tirelessly, doing whatever labor he could find to support his parents and younger siblings. Driving cattle, cutting timber, and carrying out strenuous tasks were simply parts of his daily life. These experiences shaped him, building a sense of loyalty, duty, and the belief that one must stand firm for family honor. But the environment that toughened him also pushed him into conflict with the law. When he was still only 14 or 15, he faced arrest for a petty offense that many later historians considered poorly supported by evidence. With their reputation already tarnished, the Kelly family became the first to be suspected whenever trouble occurred in the district. For several years, Ned found himself repeatedly accused of offenses, often without clear proof. In 1871, he received a sentence of 3 years hard labor after being linked to a stolen horse. For a young man barely into adulthood, such a punishment left deep marks. It hardened him and eroded whatever trust he still had in the fairness of the legal system. After his release in 1874, Ned returned home determined to live quietly and support his family. But the pressure from authorities did not ease. Police raids, questioning, and constant surveillance ensured that suspicion continued to cling to him. No matter how hard he tried, Ned could not step out from beneath that cloud. Everything changed in April 1878 with the Fitzpatrick incident. Constable Alexander Fitzpatrick arrived at the Kelly homestead to arrest Dan Kelly for alleged horse theft. According to several accounts, Fitzpatrick had been drinking and behaved improperly towards Ned's sister. A struggle broke out, and Fitzpatrick later claimed Ned shot at him. The Kellys denied the accusation, and many historians now question Fitzpatrick's testimony. However, the word of a policeman outweighed the word of a poor Irish family. Ned's mother was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Ned and Dan were declared outlaws and hunted across Victoria. This was the turning point that pushed Ned into open defiance. Forced into the bush, Ned and Dan were given shelter by struggling settlers who had also suffered at the hands of the police. From this environment, a small group formed consisting of Ned Kelly, Dan Kelly, Steve Hart, and Joe Byrne. They eventually became known as the Kelly Gang. Authorities viewed them as a serious threat, while many working-class settlers saw them as defenders against police oppression. The gang carried out 2 major bank robberies, first at Euroa in 1878, and then at Jerilderie in 1879. Remarkably, they ensured that civilians were not harmed. During the Jerilderie raid, they provided reassurance and treated townspeople with a surprising level of courtesy. It was in Jerilderie that Ned wrote and dictated what became known as the Jerilderie Letter. This document served as a long, impassioned account of his grievances. He condemned police corruption, brutality, and discrimination against the poor and the Irish. His writing revealed a man driven not only by anger, but by a sense of moral reasoning. He expressed belief in fairness and dignity, values that guided many of his choices despite the violent conflict unfolding around him. The tension between the Kelly gang and the authorities reached its height in June 1880 at Glenrowan. The gang planned to derail a police train, capture the officers, and negotiate the release of Ned's mother. The plan failed, leading to a long siege that would become one of the most famous events in Australian history. Ned emerged wearing a homemade suit of armor constructed from heavy iron plates. This armor was designed to withstand bullets and remains one of the most iconic images of the era. The siege lasted through the night, with fierce gunfire on both sides. Joe Byrne was killed first, followed by Dan Kelly and Steve Hart. Ned, injured and exhausted, continued to fight until police bullets struck his unprotected legs. He fell and was finally captured. The sight of a wounded man still standing in his iron armor became a powerful and enduring symbol. After his capture, Ned was taken to Melbourne to stand trial. Crowds gathered, some denouncing him, others expressing sympathy for the hardship his family had endured. Despite the public's divided opinion, the legal outcome was never in doubt. Ned Kelly was convicted of murdering a police officer at Stringy Bark Creek. He was sentenced to death by hanging. On the 11th of November 1880, he faced the gallows at Melbourne Jail. His reputed final words, "Such is life," became part of Australian folklore. But Ned Kelly's story did not end with his execution. It sparked a debate that has lasted more than a century. To many, he was a violent criminal who challenged law and order. To others, he was a man driven to extremes by an unjust system. His life has become a lens through which Australians examine issues of class, power, fairness, and the struggles of early settlers. His legacy lives on through literature, film, folk songs, museum exhibits, and especially the paintings of Sidney Nolan. Ned Kelly has become a cultural icon whose image continues to evoke powerful reactions. For many Australians, especially those from rural and traditional backgrounds, Ned represents loyalty to family, courage in hardship, and the belief that justice must apply to all. Viewed through a traditional perspective, his story reflects timeless values: family loyalty, personal honor, moral courage, and the conviction that the law must be just if it expects respect. Although Ned committed crimes and bore the consequences, his story reminds us that fairness must guide authority. When society fails to treat people with dignity, conflict becomes inevitable. Ned Kelly's life stands as both a warning and a lesson. Justice must be even-handed, power must be accountable, and every individual, no matter their background, deserves a fair chance.